How's it going, everyone? This is another video on the rules of Baldur's Gate 3, or you could think of it as the rules of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition for Baldur's Gate 3 players, because that's the rule set the game is based on. And we're going to talk about selecting your character's class. This is the most important decision when selecting a character, when creating a character, because it's what will most affect your play experience. Okay, it's more important than, you know, the race that you pick. It's more important than your character's background or ability score. It is the most important decision. And it might seem overwhelming because, oh, there's 12 to choose from and there's all these details. I'll make it easy for you. There's only 4 to choose from. There's only 4 base character classes because there's 4 base playstyles. And that's not just the case for Dungeons & Dragons or Baldur's Gate 3, but for role-playing games in general. Okay? All the other classes are just variants and combinations of those 4. Okay? And those 4 are Fighter. I'll show you these character animations as I click on them. Cleric. Rogue. I like this one with the coin. And Wizard. Okay, so these 4 playstyles are as follows. Okay, the Fighter is exactly what it sounds like. Okay, if you want a character who's really good at fighting, that's what they're spending most of their focus on, well, that's the one for you to pick. The Cleric is more of a support unit. Okay, so the Cleric casts spells that protect or increase the abilities of other characters in the party. Okay, so they could heal other characters, they could boost the abilities of other characters, that sort of thing. That said, the Cleric is okay in a fight as well, because, well, if you're up there running around to other players to heal them, well, you have to be tough enough to withstand whatever damage you might take in that situation. Alright, next we have the Rogue. So the Rogue is more of your sneaking around, stealthy sort of character, picking locks, stealing, pickpocketing. They'll either keep their distance in a fight with a ranged weapon. See, they depict the Rogue with a bow here. And the Rogue might, if they're close up, they might sneak up on their enemies to deal extra damage, that sort of thing. And then we have the Wizard. Okay, the Wizard is the spellcaster. So if you like a kind of playstyle where you have this long list of spells, and for different situations you're selecting what spell you want to cast for that situation, maybe it's an attack spell, maybe it's a spell to help other players, maybe it's an environmental based spell to help you travel through a certain region. So long list of spells, always growing that list, selecting which spell to cast, well then the Wizard is the character for you to pick, okay? Or the class for you to pick. So that's 4 of them. Everything else is a combination of the others, okay? So let's go through the others. Now, as mentioned, I think I mentioned this, that in this video I'm just going to give an overview of the play styles for the different classes, and in a future video I'll actually get into the stats and what they mean, and we'll talk about the mathematics for every one of the classes. So, for the Fighter, a variant of the Fighter is the Barbarian. Okay, so the Barbarian is more about offense than defense. Okay, the Barbarian does not wear as much armor, has abilities to deal more damage with their weapons. The Barbarian is tougher, so the Barbarian can take more damage than the Fighter, but doesn't wear as much armor, right? Whereas the Fighter, it's a balance between offense and defense. Okay, they can wear all the armor that there is, use all the weapons that there are. You can train them to be more defensive, more offensive, but in general they're balanced between those two. Barbarian is more about offense than defense, so they can soak up a lot of damage while they deal a lot of damage. So if that's the kind of fighting style you like more, okay, Barbarian's for you. And then we have the variant of the Wizard. okay, which is the sorcerer. The sorcerer doesn't have access to as many spells as the wizard, but the sorcerer has more freedom with regards to how they cast their spells. There's ways they can alter their spells, although they don't have access to as many of them. So if you don't care so much about having a huge long list of spells to cast, but you want to be able to be more creative in terms of how you cast them, well then the sorcerer is for you. Okay, so that's already 6 classes that we went through. Okay, we went through the 4 core ones: fighter, cleric, wizard, and rogue, and then a variant of the fighter, the barbarian, and a variant of the wizard, which is the sorcerer. And that's already half the classes. Okay, now you don't have to create your own character, right? You can play as one of the story characters. And notice that the 4 first characters that you meet in the game, what are their classes? Cleric, wizard, fighter, and rogue. Those 4 core classes. Okay? And is that a coincidence? I mean, it's a pretty convenient one, but seeing how much work was put into this game, I'm leaning into thinking it wasn't a coincidence that the first 4 characters you meet in the story are also the first 4, or the core 4 classes. Okay, so back to class selection. Wait, let's go to custom character, and oops, back to class. There we go. Okay, so the other 6, which are combinations of other classes, let's go through those. So we have the paladin. This is a combination of a fighter and a cleric. So the paladin is very good in a fight, can wear all that armor that the fighter wears, uses all those weapons, but their abilities also contain magical support abilities, not just support abilities, but mostly magical support abilities, like the cleric. Okay, so they're not quite as good at fighting as the fighter, but still very powerful in a fight, but they do have that bit of magic that is more so like a healing or support unit kind of spells. That's the paladin. Then we have the ranger. Okay, the ranger you could think of as a combination of the fighter and a wizard. So the ranger is also a warrior. They also have access to spells like a paladin, but the spells they have access to aren't so much support spells like a cleric, but more so environmental and attack-based spells like the wizard. Okay, the ranger is more of a spellcaster than the paladin is, just like the wizard is more of a spellcaster than the cleric. Okay, but the paladin is a better fighter than the ranger. Now some people might disagree with me on that. Okay, the ranger is kind of a controversial class in like game design discussions, but I'll go ahead and say the paladin is more of a fighter than the ranger is, and more of a support unit than the ranger is. So in that sense, the ranger is more like a mix between a fighter and a wizard. Okay, wizard being more of a spellcaster than the cleric, cleric of course being more of a support unit than the wizard, and more tough than the wizard. And then we have the monk. Okay, so the monk is a warrior that uses unarmed fighting, maybe some simple weapons. If you imagine the heroes from martial arts movies, that's what the monk is. Okay, sometimes those heroes from martial arts movies have, some sort of supernatural abilities where they can do things super fast or float in the air. Well, the monk has something called key points or kai points that let him do stuff like that. And it's not really casting magic spells, but it's comparable. It's, like I said, these kind of supernatural abilities that people might have in martial arts movies. And so you could think of the monk as a mix of a fighter and a rogue. Okay, so they are definitely a warrior like a fighter. They can deal a lot of damage, soak up a lot of damage, but they are more of an agility-based fighter. Okay, see, their core stat is dexterity. More of an agility-based fighter like the rogue. Okay, so they can be quick with things, they can be sneaky, stealthy with things as well. And so they're kind of a mix of a fighter and rogue in that sense. Okay, moving on now, we'll talk about the bard. So the Bard, if you were to describe the Bard as a combination of two classes, it would be a mix of Rogue and Cleric. But in many ways, the Bard is a combination of all four core classes. Okay, so they are a ranged dexterity-based fighter, like the Rogue. Okay, and in that sense, they're good at doing sneaky stuff. But they are also a magical support unit like the Cleric. Okay, so they have a lot of spells, abilities that boost the abilities of other characters in the party. They can heal other characters in the party. Based on the lore, their magic comes from music, performing music. So that's why they have them with the musical instrument. So in that sense, it's a combination of Cleric and Rogue. But they also have attack spells. They also have environmental-based spells that help them be more of a ranged, sneaky character. Well, that's kind of like the Wizard. Environmental-based spells, attack spells. So in that sense, the Bard can be wizard-ish too. And the Bard can be trained enough as a agility-based fighter, dexterity-based fighter, with some magical abilities as an assist that can make the Bard a pretty good up-close melee warrior as well. Okay, so in this sense, the Bard is seen as a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. They're pretty good at fighting, but not as good as the fighter. Pretty good support unit, but not like the Cleric. Pretty good at sneaking around, but not like the Rogue. And pretty good at casting magic, though not like the Wizard. So if you want to try everything, and you just can't decide, okay, be the Bard. Okay, now that said, you do get to control other party members. As mentioned, right, you meet other characters throughout the game who you also control, so you do get to try out other characters in that sense. But your own character is the one that is always with you. So if you always want to have a character in your party that can do a bit of everything, well, the Bard is the way to go. Personally, I like the Bard because you can do different things in different situations, and that's pretty cool. Alright, so moving on now to the Druid. Okay, so the Druid is a spellcaster. They can do support spells like the Cleric. They can also do... I'll just show you the animation here so I don't interrupt it. Okay, they can also do environmental or attack spells like the Wizard. Now, by the way, just to clarify, Wizard does have some support spells. Cleric does have some attack spells. But generally speaking, the Cleric magic is more about support, and the Wizard magic is more about attack and environmental-based abilities, like changing the environment around you, moving through the environment. So the Druid has access to both kinds of magic. They can be trained one way or the other. So they are kind of a combination of Cleric and Wizard. It should be mentioned you can train a Druid to be a pretty powerful melee fighter as well, because they can turn into animals like bears and be really tough and strong in that sense. So that's the Druid, and the one class we haven't discussed yet is the Warlock. So the Warlock is a spellcaster, okay, like the Wizard, but they are tougher than the Wizard. They can use more weapons and armor than the Wizard, and in that sense they're more like the Rogue, okay? So they're decently tough, okay? They can use a decent variety of weapons and armor, but not so much like the fighter, okay? So the Warlock is more of a... In a fight, they'll be someone who more so keeps their distance, like a Rogue, okay? But they do have access to a decent amount of environmental attack-based magic, like the Wizard. Okay, we haven't talked about lore of these different classes much, but here, to explain the difference between a Warlock and a Wizard, it kind of is useful. So the Wizard is said to have gained their ability through studying. Okay, so they spent a lot of time reading books, indoors, not doing so much physical stuff like a fighter or a barbarian would. Okay, so the Wizard is not as tough, more scrawny, that sort of thing. Okay, the Warlock, they gain their magical ability through making a deal with some powerful, mysterious, maybe sinister entity, right? So they maybe did do a lot of physical stuff, so they are tougher than the Wizard, okay? They can take more damage. They are stronger, more agile. But They don't have as much magical ability, but again, they're, you know, still okay in a fight. So it's like a combination of rogue and wizard. You could think of it that way. So if you want to have some magical ability, but also be not too bad up close and personal in a fight, well then Warlock is the one to go with. So that is an overview of the 12 different classes, right? Easy to think of it as just 4 of them. Okay, Fighter, Cleric as a support unit, Rogue as your sneaky unit, Wizard as spellcaster, and then there's the combinations and variants of those 4. So I hope that clears it up. And again, in a follow-up video, we'll talk about the actual stats, the actual mathematics, and those rules regarding all of these classes. So until next time, enjoy.